How do you think gamelan fit in the British society?
I think, well, it's still a bit of a esoteric minority pursuit, taking the population as a whole. I think it has a very interesting place in multicultural education, though, because we are a multicultural country. And I think the kind of people who like playing gamelan will tell you that's a good thing. That's a brilliant thing. We like the enrichment, and we've always been a very diverse people. There never was a pure race of British people. It never existed. We're the result of lots of waves of migration of different kinds and conquest and refugees arriving and all these things. So there's always a sort of cultural melting pot element to British society. The extent to which people admit that is a different matter. But when you think of modern multicultural society, you're talking about recent immigrant groups, recent being the past 100 years. So you're thinking about Afro-Caribbean communities and South Asian communities, Bengali, Pakistani, Sikh, Gujarati, all these various South Asian ethnic groups. And if you find groups that are playing Indian classical music or in the Chinese community as well, you find things like the dragon dance that's done Chinese New Year. There will generally be people from the Chinese community doing that, as it's people from the Indian community doing Indian classical music. Gamelan's different because we don't have a big Indonesian community in this country. So it isn't something that's rooted in the Indonesian population in Britain. It's something that's been taken as another layer of culture. It's not where we're coming from as people. The way that if you ask somebody who does Indian dance, for Kathak dance or something like that, what it means to them, it's much more about this is my culture, this is my roots, I'm keeping my culture alive. With the people who play gamelan, it's different, because it's not our culture by sort of birthright. It's something that we've chosen to do. It has a big advantage then, if you're going into a very multicultural, multi-ethnic school to do this as an activity, you're starting with a blank sheet of paper, as it were. If you go in to do Indian dance, there'll be Indian kids in the class who know a lot about this, and it's theirs. If you go in with gamelan, everybody's starting from zero, generally. You'd be it's very unusual to find a child of Indonesian heritage randomly turning up in a workshop. So, we can, in a sense, market this or pitch this as, we can do this as a multicultural activity, but it's not privileging any one group over any other group. And again, that helps in the sense that, gamelan isn't sort of rooted anywhere in particular. You come to gamelan as a matter of free choice, rather than because you're born into it. Having just said my own children are born into it, but they're the exceptions. Okay, they're not typical of the people who play gamelan in this country. It is still, as I say, quite a minority thing. I came across quite an interesting phrase the other day. I was reading a review of a CD that's recently been done, just of different versions of Ladrang Pangkur. A CD just of Pangkur, brilliant, I'm thinking. And the review, this was in a magazine dedicated to world music. The reviewer, wasn't quite as excited about this as I was, and he said, "Oh, this is the kind of CD which is really made for people inside the gamelan ghetto." I thought, oh, is that how the rest of the sort of, world music community, the world music audience in Britain looks at us, with this strange little ghetto of obsessive people learning how to play panka in 10 different ways or whatever? Well, that's just one person's opinion. I think most people will be a bit more generous.
Have you ever composed using gamelan or mixed with other instruments?
No. And I have nothing against people composing for gamelan. That's fine, but I think, again, when you start a gamelan class or a gamelan group in Britain, I've had these experiences with several different groups when I was teaching in Oxford and elsewhere years ago. There are kind of two types of gamelan player. If I can sort of caricature them. The one sort is looking at it as a kind of found instruments. What can we do with these? There's different. I don't want to know what the Javanese do with them. I want to know what I can do with them. I want to compose. I want to mix them with other things. Or, let's get Slendro and Pelog together. No. And then there's another type who approach it as a form of almost like train spotting or stamp collecting. No, we have to learn exactly what the Javanese do. No, tell me exactly what notes to play. Now, my personal opinion, I'm not saying I'm right and anybody else is wrong. You bring to it your own personality and you contribute, whatever. I think that both those types of people are kind of missing the point. If I get back to what I was saying about jazz, the creativity in gamelan is not about doing something completely different and avant-garde with it. It's learning to create music within the parameters of that culture. So if I am playing, just my ideal scenario, Gendare, because that's the instrument I'm most interested in. I like it most. That was what I wrote my PhD thesis on, was Gendare accompaniment in wayang, which has a very improvised element to it, following the voice of these sulukan and that. You're creating the music as you go. And that is an act of creativity. Creativity isn't limited to composition. It can be the way you realize, the way you interpret the piece as you're playing it. So for me, the joy of creativity in gamelan is that every time you play the piece, it's different. Every time you play the piece, you can do different things with it. And it doesn't necessarily matter whether that's exactly what a Javanese player would have done. You're pushing those boundaries. You're bringing your own creativity, your own musical personality to it. Yeah, maybe that's a bit different, and that's where you're not. It's not like a Western score where you have to play it note for note. And it's not something that you have to compose in order to be creative. You can be playing classical gamelan and be creative as you do it. So does that answer the question?
Sense, because like performing dance, it's the same.
Yeah.
Every time you perform, it's different. Because you want to put your creativity into the dance. So every time I perform, it's different.
Yes, yeah. I think, again, people who have a background in jazz music understand that instinctively, perhaps more than people whose background is in Western classical music. So, people who come to it as a jazz player or a rock drummer or whatever, maybe have slightly more of that feel